I'm going to go through this pretty quickly then. So just really high level, our organization, NeuroTalent Works, partners directly with companies to consider how to advance neurodiversity in the workplace. We want neurodiversity to have a seat at the table as companies talk about diversity and inclusion, and that we are part of that conversation. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but feel free to ask questions if you have any as we go. At a high level of what our organization does and how we approach this, we start with corporations, promoting what neurodiversity is, educating around what this means, and ultimately trying to find the right hiring managers and teams to identify jobs and teams that, are committed to this and understanding what neurodiversity requires in terms of different hiring practices, and also truly how to build an inclusive workplace practice. I think what's notable here is that when we consider diversity and inclusion, most of the focus is on identity diversities. It's a lot more of what's apparent versus neurodiversity being a diversity category that is not apparent or not as apparent. And so this requires companies and teams to actually do work differently, to approach work differently. And this is where, for Tiffany and I, and a lot of our business development efforts, it takes much more effort because we're really having to find the teams that are willing to do things differently in a large company. And that is not always easy to find those people, but they're out there. And I'll share a bit about the successes we've had. The other side of it is talent readiness. So we have a network of partners across the state and country where we source our talent from. And several of you on the call who work directly with potential job candidates, getting them ready for employment. We do see this slight gap in terms of what it means to be ready for corporate employment in an integrated employment setting. And so we are putting together some training that we plan to offer later this year. For those that were on the OCLPA call, you saw a portion of that training of what it really means to get to a competitive resume, interview skills, et cetera. And then really centering upon self-advocacy. So when you're in a job or you're going to an interview, how do you ask for accommodations if you need them? And just how do you stand confidently in who you are, your strengths, et cetera. Then ultimately, we want to match talent to jobs. And we run these neurodiversity and autism hiring programs in which we match to jobs. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but we really care about job sustainment and provide support ongoing. Most organizations maybe drop off at 90 days, but we continue to support our talent even after that, and the hiring teams, with the goal that we then get to the second and third and fourth hires within that company. So just a high level of some of the training and speaking topics we do at companies. An introduction to neurodiversity. This is usually our foot in the door. We'll come in to do a lunch and learn on neurodiversity. We'll come in for Autism Awareness Month, and we get to speak about neurodiversity. The goal of that is to find what we call internal champions. It's parents, it's neighbors, it's anyone who piques this interest and says, oh, I have a hiring capacity. I'd love to learn about your talent pool. The business case for neurodiversity, which is more for senior leaders and executives. What's awesome, Judy asked me, could I present this? And I said, from 3-4 years ago when we started, so much has changed. We don't have to give this anymore. That's the beauty of, I think, these past couple of years, that we're not even being asked to do the business case anymore. People understand it. Or we can do it really high level and they're on board. The two that are really more in depth are the hiring practices. How do we make interviews more equitable? Given that, when we look at the 80% unemployment rate, we believe that it's because interviews are set up in a traditional sense to be verbally communicating, convincing someone through words, and selling yourself to why you're the best candidate for the job. For a lot of our community.
Jessica, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The old man in the group. Can you go through that business case for neurodiversity that you don't think we need to do it? I would be concerned with that mentality based on many employers that are out there. So
yeah, sorry.
Help
Yeah,
me understand that.
yeah, let me rephrase that. The business case for neurodiversity, in the beginning, it was the business case for diversity and inclusion. That's what we were talking to companies about. We no longer have to do that. Companies are invested in diversity and inclusion, and they understand why it's good for business.
Okay.
When we go in to speak to executives, if we're invited to, we have a deck to do that, and we do talk about some of the business benefits. But to Judy's point, the metrics and data around the true value of investing in this is low. We don't have a lot of data around that. And I'd say my peers across the country also don't. But we have a lot of really good stories. I mean, Jose Velasco from SAP can tell you, we hired someone that found a defect in our system that saved us $2 million, right? Those are the types of data points that we can get to, but the really tangible data, I mean, that's a whole other effort that has to be explored with the company. It's just very intensive to get that data. It's doable.
Sorry about the detour.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. And if an executive were to ask us to do this right now, we'd scramble and pull something together with some of our other partners. But yeah, and maybe there are others who do have it. And yes, let me be clear here. We do a lot of selling. I mean, in a company, we probably do 5 to 10 meetings before we even get to one hiring. So it takes years. But yes, always happy to talk about that.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next one. This is probably the meat of it. So Judy asked me to share, how do we do this with companies, and what does a partnership usually look like to get to a hire? This is a very close partnership, and what we tell all of our companies is that we are here for the long term. We're not just here for one hire. We're here to get a first hire, and then we want to build upon that. So there's kind of 4 phases when you look at hiring. First is sourcing talent. So they look to us to be a sourcing agency in this specific talent pool. We do analysis of the job to really understand what the job requires. And then we reach out to our talent partners for job candidates, which many of you have seen those emails. We then partner to assess the candidates in a way that allows candidates to demonstrate and show the skill sets that they have for the job. Because our community is not as strong in communication skills, this is a great way for them to be able to show up and show the skills that they actually have instead of trying to sell themselves verbally. Although they do still have to do a traditional interview, this allows, this is equitable for more people to really show that I'm the best candidate. With the companies, we look at their interview process, we update their interview guides. A lot of questions are not clear and can be more direct. And then the bulk of our work is here, finding the talent, screening them. We're working with 2 neuropsychologists at UCLA who have built a cognitive styles assessment. This gets to how detail-oriented somebody is. Are you more of a verbal learner versus a visual learner? Some of these things we can't see in a traditional interview. Then a job-specific skills assessment. So I'll talk about it later. But for example, for an accounting position that we hired for, we had candidates do an Excel test. We had them do a bank reconciliation activity. This is actually showing their skills and expertise in this position. And then we prep them for the interview, do mock interviews, and help them to better skill up. The company interviews the candidates, we debrief together, and then we've trained their teams on what to expect and how our candidates will show up to a process, because it is different. And they understand that their tone of voice might be different, that the way that they answer a question might be very direct, black and white, and helping just employers to understand that. And then onboarding, same thing. We do training on what are inclusive workplace practices. And Judy asked me to share an example. JADO is a great one. The president, this is a company that is a global automobile business intelligence data research company. They have locations around the world. Their headquarters in the US is in Michigan, in Detroit, as you would imagine. However, the president lives in Orange County, and a friend of a friend introduced the president to us. And he said, this is one of our hardest positions to apply to hire for. It's an automobile researcher position. You research every single spec of every single vehicle that is out on the market. And it's very repetitive, detail orientation. You've got to love cars or be able to be in data like this. And we said, oh my gosh, this is perfect for our population. So many can go deeply and probably have a love for these types of, for cars. And so on the right side, it's really what you just saw of what we did with that team. The job specific assessment was actually doing research on a car, getting the specs for that car, and some data reasoning questions, which is what they usually use anyways. The result here, the highlights and why we did, I think why this was such a strong partnership is the executive sponsorship. The president was on board. He got his CEO on board. His VP of operations is who we worked with. And he told me, the VP of operations said, Jessica, if you had not trained me, I can tell you that most of your candidates would not have gone through our process. I had to have known how your candidates would show up to this process. And so that was huge to hear. Another, HR professional at another company saying, I've been in HR for 15 years and we've overlooked so many candidates. And I didn't know that until we've done this program. So once we get our foot in the door and do these first hires, we have the believers within the company, and we then develop those relationships further to try to build greater programs. And when you look at our peers across the country, it's a very similar model. You go in to do the first hires and then you develop upon that. So here you'll see really briefly at a high level, the companies we've worked with, mostly in Southern California. And the two here that I want to mention is these are really small businesses that we couldn't find the right candidates for. That was really disappointing for us to not be able to fill these jobs. That's a whole other conversation that we could have separately. But also these peers on the right side, what we have across the country is we all talk to each other. We all send candidates back and forth to each other. Someone just did a hiring at Dell. Someone's doing one at an insurance company. We're sending candidates to them, and the virtual world has opened up these opportunities. So from those challenges lists, Judy, I can tell you, we're addressing the companies. Our greatest challenge to share with you, Karma, is funding. It's funding for us as a team to be able to grow, to staff up so that we can scale this model. And what I was sharing with Linda and Judy is that, at some point, I think we have enough lessons learned that there's a lot to share back to the communities, to share back to the school districts of here's what we're looking for in candidates. With job developers, here's how we go and talk to companies. But it's going to take time to get there and money and investment to do that. But we're here as partners. So I'll pause here. Sorry to go so quickly.
No, that's great.
How long is your presentation, the whole presentation you give?
To a company?
Yeah.
We can do it in as quickly as a half hour, but it's usually an hour. Yeah, and we have our whole pitch deck, our sales development.
And is that something that you could give to this group?
To use? Yeah, I think that's something we'd discuss with our board. But we've always been open to collaboration. And Judy, the deck that we had worked on before, you, Tiffany, and I, on selling the business case for this, it's a lot of the same content. So yeah, I think we could definitely beef it up and